Imagine the weight of absolute darkness pressing in from all sides, the water here colder than you have ever felt, a pressing cold that seems to come from everywhere at once. Your body would feel the immense pressure bearing down upon you, not painfully, but present, unavoidable, like being held gently, but firmly by something vast and incomprehensibly ancient. Above you, the last traces of blue have long since faded into complete and utter blackness. Below you, the depths descend still further into mystery. You float suspended in this twilight realm, neither at the surface where light dances on the waves, nor in the abyssal depths where no light has ever reached. Here, in this space between two worlds, you are surrounded by the quiet, measured pulse of an ocean that moves to its own ancient rhythm. As we begin our gentle descent from the sun-drenched surface waters above, we must first understand the geography of the deep. The ocean extends downward in distinct layers, each one possessing its own character, its own inhabitants, and its own relationship with the light that travels down from that distant world so far above. The very first layer, the one we call the epipelagic zone, extends from the surface down to approximately 200 meters, and this is the realm of abundant sunlight, of warmth, of visibility and color. But beyond 200 meters, something shifts. The water transitions into what oceanographers and marine scientists have chosen to call the mesopelagic zone, or more commonly, the Twilight Zone. This is not a place with an official border or a marked boundary line, yet it exists nonetheless as a distinct realm, a region that begins at 200 meters and extends downward to approximately 1,000 meters below the surface. The naming itself speaks to the character of this place. Twilight, that magical hour between day and night when the world exists in neither one state nor another, but rather in a luminous in-between. Here, in this twilight zone, the conditions become progressively more extreme as one descends deeper still. The temperature, which hovers around 15 to 20 degrees Celsius in the upper layers, begins to cool noticeably. As you drift downward through this zone, the water temperature gradually drops from perhaps 12 degrees Celsius at the 200-meter mark down to around 4 degrees Celsius by the time you reach depths of 1,000 meters. This is cold, a cold that feels primordial and transformative, a cold that has shaped every creature living within it across countless generations. And yet, the cold is not the most striking aspect of this realm. It is the pressure, the immense, relentless, crushing weight of the ocean itself pressing inward from all directions. At the 200-meter depth, where the Twilight Zone begins, the pressure is already approximately 20 atmospheres, a weight equivalent to having 20 times the weight of Earth's atmosphere pressing down upon you. By the time you reach 500 meters, this pressure has increased to roughly 50 atmospheres. And as you approach that 1,000-meter boundary, where the Twilight Zone meets the true deep, the pressure approaches 100 atmospheres or more, a force so great that it seems almost impossible that anything living could exist within it. In darkness so profound that it seems to have weight and substance of its own, one might expect to find a barren wasteland, a place devoid of life and movement and purpose. Yet this assumption would be profoundly mistaken. The Twilight Zone, despite its darkness and cold and pressure, represents one of the most densely populated regions of the entire ocean, a realm teeming with life in forms both familiar and utterly alien to those of us who dwell in the bright world above. The most striking aspect of this ecosystem is a simple one to state, but profound in its implications. Approximately 80% of all the biomass in the ocean, that is to say, 80% of the total living matter, the collective weight of all creatures large and small, resides within this twilight zone despite its crushing conditions and its eternal darkness. This means that if one were to take all the fish in the sea, all the squid and all the shrimp and all the other creatures that swim and drift through the waters of our world, the overwhelming majority of them, in terms of total weight and numbers, would be found here, in this narrow band between 200 and 1,000 meters. This fact speaks to something fundamental about the way life has distributed itself throughout the ocean. The shallow waters we know, the coral reefs and kelp forests and sunlit shallows where humans swim and dive and fish commercially, represent a thin, glittering skin of life upon a much vaster, deeper ocean. The twilight zone is the true heart of the ocean's living world, a realm we are only beginning to truly understand despite our centuries of ocean exploration. It is as if we have been watching the surface of a vast tapestry, while remaining largely ignorant of the intricate patterns woven into its deeper layers. The creatures that inhabit this realm have evolved remarkable adaptations to thrive in conditions that would seem impossibly hostile to life as we typically understand it. They have developed specialized sensory systems, modified body structures, and behavioral patterns that allow them not merely to survive, but to flourish in the perpetual twilight and cold. Some have developed eyes of extraordinary sensitivity, capable of detecting the faintest traces of bioluminescent light. Others have lost their eyes entirely, relying instead on other senses, on the ability to feel vibrations in the water, on the detection of electrical fields, on the ability to sense chemicals dissolved in the ocean's waters. Among all the creatures that call the Twilight Zone home, none is more emblematic, none more perfectly adapted to this particular realm than the remarkable lanternfish. These small creatures, ranging in size from approximately 2 centimeters to perhaps 8 centimeters in length, are found in astonishing numbers throughout the mesopelagic zone, with more than 100 distinct species identified and described by marine scientists. In terms of sheer abundance, in terms of the total number of individuals existing in the ocean at any given moment, lanternfish may very well be the most numerous vertebrate on Earth. The name lanternfish derives from perhaps the most distinctive feature of these remarkable creatures: a system of photophores, or light-producing organs, distributed across their bodies. These photophores are not random adornments, but rather a sophisticated and precise system of biological light production, each one capable of generating light through a chemical process called bioluminescence. The light is created through the interaction of a protein called luciferin with an enzyme called luciferase, a process so efficient and so well controlled that virtually no heat is wasted in the production of this light. What makes lanternfish photophores particularly remarkable is the specificity and precision of their arrangement. Each species of lanternfish possesses its own unique pattern of photophores, a constellation of lights as distinctive as a fingerprint or a signature. Some species have photophores arranged in neat rows along the underside of their bodies. Others possess photophores clustered around their eyes, creating an effect almost like reading glasses made of living light. Still others have photophores distributed in complex patterns along their flanks, their tails, even their fins. The purposes served by this bioluminescent system are multiple and interconnected. The most straightforward function is what scientists call counterillumination, the practice of matching the faint light that filters down from the surface far above. You see, even in the twilight zone, there is a certain amount of light, not much, but some, that manages to penetrate down from the sun hundreds of meters above. This light, filtered through all that water, creates a faint blue glow from above. A creature's silhouette against this dim background would make it visible to predators looking up from below. By producing light from its own underside, a lanternfish can essentially erase its shadow, matching the faint illumination from above and rendering itself invisible to predators lurking in the darkness below. But counterillumination is only part of the story. The specific patterns of photophores also serve a communicative function, allowing lanternfish to recognize one another in the darkness, to identify members of their own species and potentially their own population groups. The lights flash and pulse according to patterns that may convey information about identity, about breeding readiness, about the presence of food or danger. In a world where sound travels differently than it does in air, where visibility extends only a few meters at most, bioluminescence becomes a language as complex and nuanced as any visual communication system found in the sunlit world above. The production of this light comes at a metabolic cost, energy that must be invested in maintaining these light-producing organs and powering their illumination. Yet this cost is clearly worth it to lanternfish, given the prevalence of photophores throughout the entire population. This suggests that the benefits, in terms of survival, in terms of finding mates, in terms of hunting or avoiding predation, exceed the energy expenditure required. It is a fascinating example of how evolution works, how organisms develop traits that solve specific problems imposed by their environment, even when those solutions require significant investment of biological resources. If one were to venture into the twilight zone at various times throughout the day and night, one would notice something extraordinary occurring: a migration of life, a vast movement of creatures traveling upward and downward through the water column in a synchronized dance that repeats with the regularity of the sun's passage across the sky. This phenomenon, known as the diel vertical migration or the daily vertical migration, is perhaps the largest animal migration on Earth in terms of biomass, involving billions upon billions of organisms moving in concert twice each day. Here is how this remarkable behavior unfolds across the hours. As evening falls and darkness begins to settle over the ocean, Creatures that have spent the day resting in the deeper waters of the Twilight Zone begin to move upward. Lanternfish, hatchetfish, small squid, copepods, and countless other residents of the mesopelagic zone rise gradually toward the surface, toward the epipelagic zone where light still lingers and where food is more abundant. This ascent is not rapid. It is a gradual, measured movement that takes place over hours, a slow drift upward through the water column as creatures migrate toward food sources in the upper waters. The upward migration typically covers a distance of between 200 and 400 meters, meaning that creatures at the deeper boundary of the Twilight Zone might rise all the way to the surface waters, while those at the shallower boundary might only ascend to meet them partway. This staggered migration, with creatures distributed across the water column at various depths throughout the night hours, represents an efficient use of available resources. The creatures feed on plankton and small organisms in the upper waters, taking advantage of the greater productivity of these sunlit and sun-influenced layers. But as dawn breaks and the sky above grows light once more, the migration reverses. The creatures that have spent the night feeding in the upper waters begin a slow descent, a gradual sinking back down toward their daytime resting depths in the Twilight Zone. This downward migration takes place more slowly and more deliberately than the upward migration, a descent that unfolds across the daylight hours as the sun rises higher and higher in the sky above. By the time full daylight has established itself, the creatures have mostly returned to the deeper waters of the Twilight Zone, where they will rest throughout the day before rising again as evening falls. The driving force behind this extraordinary behavior is the need to balance two competing priorities: the need to find food in productive surface waters and the need to avoid predation in those bright, dangerous upper waters during the day. The Twilight Zone provides a refuge, a place where the light is dim enough to provide concealment, yet not so dark as to make hunting impossible. By migrating to the surface to feed at night when visibility is poor, the creatures reduce their risk of predation while still accessing abundant food sources. By retreating to the Twilight Zone during the day, they reduce their visibility to the larger predators that hunt more effectively in the brighter waters. This migration has profound implications for the entire structure of the ocean ecosystem. The movement of these billions of organisms creates a daily pulse of energy, a flow of nutrients and biomass from the surface waters down to the Twilight Zone and back again. As creatures feed on plankton in the surface waters and then migrate downward, they carry the energy they have consumed in the form of their own living bodies and their excreted waste products down into the deeper layers. In this way, the Twilight Zone receives a constant influx of nutrients from the productive surface waters, sustaining the remarkable density of life found at these depths. While lanternfish dominate the Twilight Zone in terms of numbers, they share this realm with many other remarkable creatures, each adapted in its own way to the specific challenges posed by this environment. Among the most distinctive of these companions is the hatchetfish, creatures whose very body shape seems to whisper secrets about the pressures and challenges of life in the deep. Hatchetfish possess a body form that is immediately recognizable once you understand its purpose. They are extremely compressed laterally, meaning they are flattened from side to side in a way that creates an almost paper-thin profile when viewed from the front. If you were to look at a hatchetfish head-on, it would appear as little more than a thin line, almost invisible. This extreme flattening serves a crucial function in the counter-illumination strategy that dominates Twilight Zone survival. By presenting such a minimal profile to the light filtering down from above, a hatchetfish casts an almost imperceptible shadow, making it virtually impossible for a predator looking up from below to detect its presence. The sides of hatchetfish are covered with silvery scales, scales that reflect light with remarkable efficiency. These scales serve a similar purpose to the photophores found in lanternfish. They help break up the creature's silhouette and assist in counter-illumination. But the silvery coloration serves additional purposes as well. In the dim light of the Twilight Zone, silver is nearly invisible, blending seamlessly with the faint blue glow that filters down from above. This combination of lateral compression and silvery sides makes hatchetfish nearly invisible predators, creatures that can approach their prey almost undetected. Hatchetfish also possess photophores, like lanternfish, though these light-producing organs are typically less extensive and less elaborately patterned than those found in their more abundant cousins. The photophores in hatchetfish are arranged primarily along the ventral or underside of the body, assisting in the critical counter-illumination function. By controlling the brightness of these photophores, a hatchetfish can adjust its silhouette's visibility based on the amount of light filtering down from above, effectively becoming even more invisible. The eyes of hatchetfish are among the most remarkable adaptations found in Twilight Zone creatures. These eyes are positioned on the top of the head and are angled somewhat upward, allowing the fish to look up at the dim light filtering down from the surface while remaining positioned to catch the bioluminescent flashes of other creatures around them. The sensitivity of these eyes is extraordinary, calibrated to detect photons, individual particles of light, at a density that would render the world completely dark to human eyes. Yet to a hatchetfish, the Twilight Zone is full of visible light, full of movement and detail and information. The hunting strategy of hatchetfish reflects their body shape and sensory capabilities. They are ambush predators, creatures that float quietly in the darkness, their silvery sides and counter-illumination rendering them nearly invisible. When a smaller prey item drifts too close, a hatchetfish strikes with remarkable speed, its lateral compression allowing for rapid acceleration in the vertical plane. The sudden movement, the flash of a silvery side, the precise strike of those jaws, all of these happen in the fraction of a second, so quickly that the prey creature scarcely has time to register danger before it has been consumed. As we continue our exploration of the Twilight Zone, we must take a moment to truly appreciate the constancy of this environment, the way it remains so remarkably consistent across hours and days and seasons. Unlike the surface waters above, which experience the daily cycle of light and darkness and the seasonal changes that come with the Earth's rotation and its orbit around the sun, The twilight zone exists in a state of perpetual dimness, a condition that changes only slightly with the time of day or the season of the year. This constancy has allowed life here to develop along different evolutionary pathways than life in more variable environments. Consider the eyes that evolved in twilight zone creatures. They are typically quite large, with pupils that are often fully dilated even in the minimal light present at these depths. The photoreceptor cells in these eyes are predominantly rods rather than cones, specialized for detecting low light rather than for perceiving color. Many twilight zone fish are essentially colorblind, lacking the visual processing machinery necessary to perceive the full spectrum of colors. But this apparent limitation is actually an elegant adaptation. In an environment where colors fade to gray and blue and black, the ability to perceive fine color distinctions would be wasted energy. Instead, these creatures have sacrificed color vision in favor of sensitivity to the faintest traces of light. The temperature consistency of the twilight zone also shapes the creatures that inhabit it. The relatively stable, cold temperatures mean that metabolism proceeds at a measured, economical pace. Creatures here generally move more slowly than their surface-dwelling cousins, expending energy more carefully, living lives that unfold at a slower tempo. A lanternfish swims with a deliberate, undulating motion, not the darting, rapid movements of a surface fish. A hatchetfish hangs nearly motionless in the water, waiting for prey to approach rather than chasing actively. This slower pace of life is not a deficit, but rather an adaptation, an elegant solution to the challenge of thriving in an environment where food is less abundant than in the sunlit waters above. The darkness of the twilight zone has also influenced the way these creatures interact with one another. In the absence of clear visual signals based on body color and movement, bioluminescence becomes an essential language. The flashes and glows produced by thousands of creatures throughout the twilight zone create a visual environment that is actually quite information-rich, if one has the eyes and the cognitive ability to interpret these signals. A creature can recognize the species of another creature by the pattern of its bioluminescent display. It can determine whether another creature is hunting or feeding or looking for a mate. In this way, bioluminescence serves many of the same functions that color and movement serve in the bright world above, but in a form adapted specifically to the demands of perpetual twilight. The pressure of the twilight zone, while seeming hostile, has also driven remarkable adaptations. The cells of deep-sea creatures are filled with solutions and structures that remain stable and functional even under immense pressure. Their proteins fold in specific configurations that allow them to function optimally at high pressure. Their cell membranes, built from fatty compounds, maintain proper fluidity despite the extreme conditions. These biochemical adaptations are so fundamental to the biology of twilight zone creatures that many of them cannot survive in surface waters at normal pressure, just as a surface fish brought suddenly to these depths would suffer cellular damage and death. The twilight zone creatures are, in a profound sense, creatures of high pressure, adapted through countless generations to thrive nowhere else. To truly appreciate the magnitude of life in the Twilight Zone, we must consider some of the specific numbers that oceanographers have compiled through decades of research and sampling. When scientists deploy nets into the Twilight Zone and retrieve samples, they return with catches that are consistently astounding in their abundance. A single net deployment might capture hundreds or thousands of lanternfish, along with dozens or hundreds of other species, all from a volume of water that represents perhaps a tiny fraction of the entire Twilight Zone. The biomass estimates are staggering. Some oceanographers estimate that there may be as many as 10 billion tons of fish living in the Twilight Zone. 10 billion tons, a figure so vast it is almost incomprehensible. To put this in context, the total amount of fish caught by human fisheries worldwide each year is roughly 100 million tons, and we have pursued this fishing with intensive industrial methods and technology for decades. The Twilight Zone alone contains roughly 100 times more fish biomass than humanity removes from the entire ocean in a year. And this is merely the fish. It does not include the countless other creatures that inhabit this realm: the shrimp and squid and jellyfish, and other organisms that contribute substantially to the total biomass. The lanternfish, as the dominant vertebrate in this realm, deserve particular mention. Scientists estimate that there are more individual lanternfish alive in the ocean at any given moment than there are humans alive on Earth today. If you were to ask someone to estimate the total number of individual lanternfish in all the world's oceans, their answer might be in the hundreds of billions, possibly even in the trillions. This abundance is not due to recent population explosions, but rather represents a steady state that has likely existed for millions of years, a population level maintained by the balance between reproduction and predation and natural death. This abundance is possible because of the energy that flows into the Twilight Zone from above. While the Twilight Zone might seem like a harsh environment incapable of supporting vast populations, the daily vertical migration brings enormous quantities of energy and nutrients into this zone. Each night, billions of creatures rise from the Twilight Zone to feed in the surface waters, where photosynthesis by microscopic plants called phytoplankton is constantly converting sunlight into biological energy. These creatures consume a fraction of the plankton and small organisms in the surface waters, and then carry that energy back down to the Twilight Zone. In this way, the Twilight Zone is not isolated from the productive surface waters, but is rather intimately connected to them through the daily migration cycle. Additionally, there is a constant rain of organic material falling from the surface waters down into the Twilight Zone and beyond. Dead plankton, dead fish, fecal pellets excreted by zooplankton, and other organic particles drift downward through the water column in a process oceanographers call the marine snow. This marine snow provides a steady source of nutrition for creatures that remain at depth, supplementing the food they obtain through their own predatory activities. It is as if there were a snowstorm of organic material constantly falling from the bright upper waters, a silent cascade that sustains the life of the Twilight Zone. Beyond lanternfish and hatchetfish, the Twilight Zone harbors an astonishing array of other creatures, each with its own adaptations and ecological role. The small shrimp that inhabit these depths, creatures often no more than 2 or 3 centimeters long, swarm through the water in vast numbers, feeding on plankton and detritus and serving as prey for the fish that hunt them. Some of these shrimp possess bioluminescent organs of their own, either producing their own light or in some cases harboring colonies of bioluminescent bacteria that glow with their light. The squid of the Twilight Zone represent another remarkable group of inhabitants. These cephalopods, with their flexible bodies and intelligent behavior, have adapted in remarkable ways to deep-sea life. Some Twilight Zone squid possess large eyes, among the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal on Earth. Others possess eyes that are highly specialized, with different lens structures in different parts of the same eye, allowing them to focus on objects at vastly different distances simultaneously. Many squid in the Twilight Zone also possess bioluminescent photophores, participating in the same counterillumination and communication strategies that characterize other Twilight Zone creatures. The jellyfish and other gelatinous creatures of the Twilight Zone are equally remarkable. These creatures, which may spend their entire lives at depth, or which may only visit the Twilight Zone as part of a larval stage, represent an entirely different body plan from the fish and crustaceans that dominate the zone numerically. Some of these gelatinous creatures are transparent, nearly invisible in the dark waters, their only betrayal being the faint glow of bioluminescent lights scattered across their bodies. Others are brilliantly colored, displaying red or orange pigmentation that is actually invisible at these depths, where most creatures only perceive blue light, rendering them cryptic despite their vivid appearance. The predators of the Twilight Zone include some of the most remarkable and terrifying creatures in the entire ocean. The gulper eel, a creature whose scientific name Eurypharynx pelicanoides refers to its enormous throat, is a prime example. This creature is essentially a mouth attached to a body, with jaws so large that the mouth can open to a width of perhaps twice the creature's own body length. When a larger prey item drifts too close, the gulper eel expands its throat and mouth, creating a sudden vacuum that sucks the prey into the gullet. The body of the gulper eel itself is extremely thin and flexible, allowing it to accommodate prey items far larger than would seem possible. There are also several species of sleeper sharks that inhabit the Twilight Zone, large predators that cruising slowly through the darkness, using their senses of smell and electroreception to locate prey. These sharks, often gray in color with relatively small eyes, are perfectly adapted for life in the deep, moving with a slow, energy-efficient swimming style that allows them to cover vast distances in their search for food. Despite their apparently inactive demeanor, hence the name sleeper shark, they are formidable predators capable of capturing quite large prey items. The vampire squid, despite its terrifying name, is actually a detritivore, a creature that feeds on the marine snow falling from above rather than on living prey. With its deep red body and its ability to turn itself essentially inside out as a defense mechanism, The vampire squid represents yet another remarkable adaptation to Twilight Zone existence. Its large eyes, positioned on either side of its head, give it an appearance both alien and somehow endearing. A creature that has captured human imagination despite its residence far below the reach of casual observation. As we contemplate the Twilight Zone more deeply, we must consider not just the organisms that inhabit it, but the cycles and rhythms that govern their existence. The daily vertical migration, which we discussed earlier, represents just one of the temporal cycles that structure life in this realm. There are also seasonal cycles, reproductive cycles, and longer-term patterns that operate across years and decades. The reproductive cycles of Twilight Zone creatures are often intimately tied to the availability of food and to environmental conditions. Many species have evolved to reproduce during specific seasons when food is abundant and environmental conditions are most favorable for the survival of larvae and young fish. The timing of these reproductive events has been shaped by millions of years of evolution. Natural selection favoring those individuals whose reproductive timing matched the natural cycles of food availability and environmental change. For lanternfish and other Twilight Zone fish, larval development takes place during specific times of the year, often coinciding with seasonal pulses of plankton productivity. The larvae are generally found in surface waters where food is abundant, feeding on microscopic plankton until they have grown large enough to descend to the Twilight Zone depths where adult fish reside. This larval stage may last weeks or months, during which the young fish experience an entirely different life from that of their adult selves, floating in sunlit surface waters rather than residing in perpetual twilight. The predators and parasites of Twilight Zone creatures follow their own cycles as well. Diseases and parasitic infections affect fish populations, though our understanding of these pathogens and their ecological impact remains incomplete. Some Twilight Zone fish may harbor parasites that have evolved alongside them across countless generations, representing intricate relationships between host and parasite that maintain ecological balance through mechanisms we are only beginning to understand. Beyond the individual cycles of reproduction and growth, there are longer-term patterns that shape the Twilight Zone ecosystem. Climate variations, ocean current patterns, and changes in the productivity of surface waters all influence the abundance and distribution of Twilight Zone creatures. El Niño events and other large-scale oceanographic phenomena can dramatically alter food availability in the Twilight Zone, leading to changes in population sizes and distributions that may persist for years or even decades. The Twilight Zone is not a static environment, but rather a dynamic, changing realm that responds to forces both internal to the ecosystem and external, imposed by broader oceanographic and climatic patterns. Understanding these cycles and patterns is one of the great challenges facing marine scientists, as the Twilight Zone remains far less studied than the surface waters, and the complexity of its interactions and cycles is only beginning to come into focus through careful research and observation. As we near the end of our exploration of the Twilight Zone, we must briefly turn our attention to the future of this remarkable realm and the threats it faces in an era of rapid environmental change. The Twilight Zone, despite its remoteness and apparent isolation from human activity, is not immune to human influence. Several converging pressures threat to transform this ecosystem in profound ways. Ocean acidification, caused by the absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, is gradually lowering the pH of the ocean, making it more acidic. This process has implications for all marine life, but particularly for creatures with calcium carbonate shells or exoskeletons, which dissolve more readily in acidic waters. Many Twilight Zone creatures, including some of the most abundant species, rely on calcium carbonate structures, meaning they may be affected by continued acidification if current trends persist. Climate change is also altering ocean temperatures and the distribution of nutrients and food throughout the ocean. Warmer surface waters are changing the patterns of productivity and the timing of plankton blooms, the seasonal pulses of plant growth that drive much of the ocean's food web. These changes have implications that cascade down into the Twilight Zone, potentially altering the abundance and distribution of food available to creatures that migrate upward each night to feed. There is also the emerging threat of industrial-scale fishing in the Twilight Zone. As fish stocks in shallower waters have declined due to overfishing, commercial fishing interests have begun to look toward the Twilight Zone as a potential source of new fisheries. Lanternfish, which form vast schools at certain times and depths, are being targeted as a potential source of fish meal and other products. The impact of removing billions of tons of biomass from the Twilight Zone ecosystem is not fully understood, but the potential for ecological disruption is significant. The Twilight Zone creatures play crucial roles in the broader ocean ecosystem, transferring energy and nutrients between the surface waters and the deeper ocean through their vertical migrations and their predator-prey relationships. The Twilight Zone also plays a significant role in global carbon cycling. The migration of Twilight Zone creatures, combined with the sinking of organic material from above, serves to transfer carbon from the surface waters down into the deep ocean and eventually into the sediments of the seafloor. This process, sometimes referred to as the biological pump, is one of the mechanisms through which the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it in long-term carbon reservoirs. Any disruption to the Twilight Zone ecosystem could have implications for this critical process. Yet, for all these threats and challenges, the Twilight Zone remains one of the most resilient and abundant ecosystems on Earth, home to the greatest concentration of animal biomass in the ocean. The creatures that inhabit this realm have survived countless environmental challenges across millions of years of evolution. The future will depend on whether human society can make choices that respect the integrity and function of these distant, unseen ecosystems. Recognizing that the health of the Twilight Zone is inextricably linked to the health of the entire ocean, and ultimately to the well-being of all life on Earth. And so we draw gently to a close our long journey into the Twilight Zone, that remarkable realm existing between the sunlit surface and the abyssal depths, a place of pressure and cold and darkness, yet also of abundance and beauty and life in forms almost beyond imagination. We have descended, through our narration, from the 200-meter mark where Twilight Zone existence begins, through the progressively colder and darker waters, through depths where creatures float and swim and hunt in conditions that would seem impossible to life, yet where life thrives in astonishing numbers and remarkable diversity. We have encountered the lanternfish, with their bioluminescent patterns that serve as both camouflage and language, communicating through light in a darkness that surrounds them completely. We have learned of their vast numbers, the billions of individuals conducting their nightly migrations upward and downward, a synchronous dance that has repeated each day for millions of years. We have seen the hatchetfish and their silvery compression, their remarkable eyes that can perceive the faintest glimmer of light, their predatory prowess despite their small size. We have understood the cycles and pulses that structure life in the Twilight Zone, the daily vertical migrations that bring energy from the surface, the seasonal patterns of reproduction and growth, the longer-term cycles of climate and oceanographic change. We have recognized that this realm, seemingly isolated and untouched, is deeply interconnected with all other parts of the ocean, receiving nutrients from above and in turn nourishing the creatures of the deep below. And as we complete this descent, as we imagine ourselves floating in that eternal twilight, surrounded by the faint blue glow of bioluminescent light and the gentle pulse of life around us, we perhaps begin to understand something of the wonder and mystery that still remains to be explored in Earth's oceans. The Twilight Zone reminds us that vast realms of beauty and complexity exist beyond the reach of casual human observation, that the world is infinitely larger and more intricate than our immediate experience might suggest. In the darkness of that realm, the pressure pressing gently inward from all sides, the cold that seems to reach into the very depths of being, there is a kind of peace. There is the knowledge that life continues its ancient patterns, that creatures hunt and feed and reproduce and die, that the great cycle of energy and matter continues its endless turning. And in this peace, as you drift slowly downward through deeper and deeper waters, as the last traces of light from that distant world above fade completely away, perhaps you find yourself at last surrendering to the vast, gentle darkness that surrounds you, letting go of the cares and concerns of the bright world above and allowing yourself to slip peacefully into sleep. End of narration. 5,980 words.